That's more like it. Hey guys, welcome to part 4 of my Scream franchise review series where I review every Scream movie leading up to the new one, which I will see on Friday, and then review and then do a ranking of the whole franchise. And we are now on Scream 4, which came out in 2011, more than 10 years after Scream 3, so quite a bit of a gap there. Kind of gives it time to rest a little bit and then bring on the new generation. So for this, I'm going to go full on spoilers, just like I've done from my first 3 Scream reviews. Going to go full in depth into everything about this movie. So if you have not seen Scream 4, I highly recommend it. It's quite a good Scream movie. It's my second favorite one for sure. So definitely try to watch this movie if you can before watching this video. Watch it and then come back. If not, if you really don't care about spoilers, go ahead. That's your prerogative. So without further ado, in my first Scream review, it was very much a walkthrough of the movie and then me commenting on everything that happens from start to finish. Even though I just watched this movie last night, I don't necessarily know it from beginning to end like I do for the original Scream. Sorry. But I'm going to kind of touch on certain things that I want to talk about, spoiler-filled. It's going to be, like I did for Scream 3, it's going to be less formal than my normal spoiler-free reviews, but a little bit more formal than my Scream 1 and 2 reviews, if that makes sense. So, without further ado, let's get right into the opening scene, which is always the first thing I talk about with these movies. And this one is pretty good. I think it's definitely better than 3, not as good as 1, maybe on the same level as Scream 2. It's kind of a movie within a movie within a movie thing. It's super meta, where it starts with one movie and then turns out they're watching a movie, and then those people are actually in a movie as well. It's a cool idea. Although, obviously, the characters are really lame, but that's on purpose. I mean, that's by design, because they're commenting on how these things work. But it also goes on a little bit too long and gets a little bit tired. Still, it was a fun idea, and I certainly enjoyed a lot of what they did there. I think I actually enjoyed the first group of girls better than the second and third ones. The third one ended up being real, and I wasn't even completely sure at that point. I'm like, is this real now? But yeah, they were. So from that, I'm going to get introduced to, we see our returning characters again with Sydney and Gale and Dewey, our big 3. Gale and Dewey are married now, so at least we're finally got that out of the way. The will they, won't they thing is over. So they're a little bit less annoying in this movie than they were in the third one. I loved them in the first movie, liked them in the second. They really, really bothered me in Scream 3, which I talked about. It was really unfortunate that happened, because I really liked the actors and their chemistry together. At least they're married and stay together throughout this entire movie, although there's definitely some struggles and issues they have, which kind of annoyed me. I wish they wouldn't have done that, but things ended up okay, I guess. So we'll see what they do with them in the new one. And then Sydney probably has more of a presence in this one than she did in Scream 3, which was one of my big problems with Scream 3, is that Sydney hardly had a presence in it. She was in like half of the movie, maybe. She was mostly only in the third act, and aside from that, she's either not in the movie at all or just not doing anything. So that was disappointing. It was much better to see her, much nicer to see her have a much bigger role in this movie. So that was cool. And she gets introduced very early on as well. She's back in town to sell her new book, Out of Darkness, I think it's called, which is a cool idea that she did that. Meets back up with Dewey and Gale, so it was cool to see everyone reuniting again. And then we get introduced to our new group of characters, which I like this new group. Definitely better than the side characters in Scream 3. Not quite as good as the first one, but I'd say probably on the level of Scream 2. Probably about that same level. Easily better than 3, which one of my biggest issues with the movie was the characters. The side characters were just really bad, and I didn't care for them whatsoever. They're definitely a lot better here. Not all of them, but we get introduced to who we believe to be our new protagonist, our new final girl, who's going to basically take the baton from Sydney, and that's Jill Roberts, played by Emma Roberts. Funny, her last name's Roberts, not Prescott, and the same last name as the actress's name. She does a pretty good job, and I actually prefer one side of her character over the other one, which I'll get to later on when I talk about the end of the movie and the final sequence and everything. But Jill's a good character. I liked her. Certainly, I mean, Emma Roberts is a likable actress, and she does a good job in this role, and we certainly buy her as the new protagonist of this franchise, and then the twist they end up taking with her was incredible, and I'll touch on that later. We also get Kirby, played by Hayden Panettiere, which is probably my favorite new character in this movie. She's great. So funny, so knowledgeable about movies, so witty. And I just got to say, I'm generally not into short hair girls, but somehow Hayden Panettiere pulls it off. So just wanted to point that out. definitely one of the best characters in the movie. We get their other friend Olivia, who gets killed off earlier on, which was a great scene. Just first of all, this movie has much better gore. It has more gore and better kills than honestly any of the other Scream movies. Gore especially, the kills themselves aren't super elaborate, but much, much gorier. And Olivia's death is certainly probably the best kill in the movie, where she gets, it's absolutely brutal, just stabbed over and over and gutted and hung out the window. Brutal stuff. And they trick you because the killer calls Hayden Panettiere Kirby and says she's in the closet, and she's like, no, you're not. I didn't say your closet. And then look across the street and Olivia's getting killed, and they just have to stand there and watch her get killed. Great scene, great kill, very gory, probably one of the most brutal kills in the Scream franchise. Also, it certainly has a probably higher kill count than most of the other Scream movies, definitely more than the first one. But the gore, I'd say, overall, definitely more gore, even though the kills themselves aren't super elaborate. And then continuing on with the characters, we also get Charlie and Robbie, who are these two guys who run the movie club, or they call it the cinema club, in their school. And they're the two guys, they're kind of the new Randys, except not nearly as compelling or charismatic, but they're supposed to be the new Randys. The guys who are super well up on all of the horror tropes and everything, and they're the ones who are telling people about the rules, and this is what's going to happen, because they're calling it a reboot, basically, or a requel, and saying that it's not a normal sequel, but they're trying to basically outdo the original in a lot of ways. So those were kind of, that was those characters' purposes. They weren't nearly as interesting as they could have been. They weren't nearly as interesting as Randy, but they were okay. And then we'll talk more about one of them specifically later. Aside from that, there's a couple cop characters. We get Judy Hicks, who I'm kind of mixed on her. She annoyed me at times, and she was actually kind of funny at times. One scene of hers in particular, though, that I really did like is the scene where she's talking to Sydney, and she's like in the dark and you can barely see her. And he's like, Sydney. She's like, Sydney, we went to high school together. And she's like, this scene is really creepy. I'm like, what the hell is up with the chick? There's something off about her. And you feel like maybe she could be one of the killers at this point. You're like, huh, that's weird. So continuing with that, another aspect of this movie that I really liked is that they go back to kind of the first one and the second one, which is where there are a lot of potential suspects, and maybe even more so than those. There's a lot of different characters in this movie, and there's a lot of them that you believe could be the killer. There's also Jill's ex-boyfriend, Trevor, who is probably the biggest red herring of the movie, and they try to do another Kincaid, basically, where he's never around when Ghostface is doing the killings, and he always shows up right after, conveniently, which I don't like when they do that, because that feels like cheating to me, because they don't show you the character's never around when Scream's there, but when Ghostface is there, but he's not Ghostface, and it's like, come on, that feels like cheap writing, and you're lazily trying to trick us into thinking that he is Ghostface. So that did bug me quite a bit. Although what they ended up doing with his character in the end of the movie made a little bit more sense, and I enjoyed that a little bit more, which we'll get to. I think I've pretty much touched on all of the main characters. So what happens is Robbie and Charlie talk about in the class that, they talk about all things about how it's trying to outdo the original, and the rules are different now, and how the kills are going to be amped up and the gore is going to be amped up. And they also say this thing where the killers should record their kills. It should basically make their own movie out of it, and because that's what the new generation, that's what the new era of horror movies would be. Is the new aspect would be the killer would be filming their kills, and then after they say that, conveniently they start doing it. And you also, again, they try to trick you by showing Trevor, making us think he might be the killer. But just continuing on with the amount of characters, it is a little bit unbalanced at times, and I said I do like that there's a lot of potential suspects, a lot of people that could end up being Ghostface. You get Judy Hicks, you get Trevor, you get Charlie, you get Robbie, there was another one, Kirby, certainly you think could be one of the killers as well. So there's a lot of potential people that could be the killer, and then obviously you don't suspect Jill at all, which I will get to. But it also is slightly unbalanced because they struggle a little bit with, do they want to focus on the original group or do they want to focus on the new group? And they don't quite find that balance as well as they could have. So that was one of the issues I have with it. And obviously, not all of the new characters are as good as the ones in the original, like Stu and Randy. I mean, nobody's ever going to pass them up. Charlie and Robbie, like I said, are basically discount Randy's. Kirby was great. Olivia was pretty cool, even though she got killed off early. Jill, I certainly enjoy, especially towards the latter part of the movie where we get the reveal. And then Judy Hicks was a little bit hit or miss. Oh, I do want to mention Alison Brie's character, Rebecca. I enjoyed her. She was a little bit over the top, but I had a lot of fun. She played Sydney's publicist, and certainly, obviously, this is probably one of her earlier movies, and because she looked pretty young in it, but she did a great job. I always enjoy Alison Brie. She was a lot of fun, and then her death was certainly a pretty brutal one as well, and one of the better kills in the movie. She gets dropped onto a van while Dewey's giving a speech about, doing a press conference about what they're doing to find the killer and everything. So that was an aspect of the movie that I enjoyed. And then I guess, we'll just kind of get into what happens on later in the movie then. So I'm going to talk about Jill. Jill ends up being one of the killers, which is probably the best killer reveal and most surprising killer reveal, and one of the best killers in the franchise. So that was so well done. You would have never suspected her. You think she's going to be the new Sydney, that Sydney's going to pass the torch to her, because they're even related, so this is like perfect. And she seems like such a sweet girl and everything. She has a lot of good conversations with Sydney, and she ends up being one of the killers. And her motivation is she was jealous of Sydney's fame, and all she heard growing up was Sydney, 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 which is sort of understandable. I mean, people in this generation, in the 21st century, that seems like a motivation, a more modern motivation than the ones we got back in the 90s. So I liked how they added kind of a more modern motivation for a more modern Scream movie. I enjoyed that. And then she also is one of the craziest and one of the most evil, maybe the most evil killer in the entire franchise. The part where she is beating herself up and jumping onto tables and stabbing herself and everything, she's totally psychotic, and I absolutely loved it. The half of Jill Roberts where you think she's not the killer and you think she's just a sweet girl that's going to be the new final girl, I enjoyed that. She was good. I mean, she did a good job in the role, and she was a pretty good character. But when you find out she's the killer, and everything she does from then on is just to the next level. She is phenomenal. And just, she has this perfect plan, which falls apart a little bit in the end. It's not something that I loved, and I'll get to that as well. But the fact that she got this guy named Charlie, who's the other killer, to go along with her makes perfect sense. Charlie's just an idiot. He's basically a horny idiot, and he went along because she, probably fucked him or whatever. And then she ends up killing him. He's her lackey. Like, he should have known this is going to happen. He was pretty dumb. Not a very compelling character. Probably one of the weakest killers in the entire franchise. Next to Roman, I'd say those are the worst two. But I do like, the one scene I do like with Charlie is the scene with him and Kirby, where we think that Charlie's in trouble and we think that he's not Ghostface and he's tied up kind of like Steve was. And Ghostface is asking Kirby all these questions, all these horror trivia questions, and she gets them all right, and then it seems like, everything's okay. She got it right, so Charlie's free to go. And then she, frees him from the restraints and everything, and then he pulls out a knife and stabs her. That was a great moment. Charlie as a character I don't think is very compelling, but that was a very shocking moment, even though his reasoning for doing it was pretty whiny and petty. But the moment itself was definitely a shocker, even though, like I said, the character wasn't super compelling. He ends up dying, and Jill is, of course, the main villain. It's tough to, another small issue I have, and maybe someone can point out to me exactly which killer was where. It seems like a little bit of a stretch how quickly they were able to get around, because there are certain scenes in this movie where I think, how could that have been either one of them? How were they able to get from here to there so quickly? Unless I was maybe a little bit confused about the passage of time. So some of those things felt like a little bit of a stretch to me, but overall, what they ended up doing with the Ghostface killer in this movie, Jill specifically, was phenomenal, and definitely one of my favorite killers. Probably, I would easily say top 3, probably top 2, probably not number 1, probably second after Billy Loomis, but Jill is a phenomenal killer. And she might have been number one if it weren't for some of the things that happened at the end. Which brings me to a couple more of my issues with the movie, and that's that the third act, which most of it is great. The stuff at the house is great, and then I alluded to something with Trevor earlier. They do a little bit of a bait and switch where Trevor says he's going upstairs, and then Jill says, oh, Trevor never went upstairs. So like, oh, so Trevor's got to be the killer then. They do this thing where Trevor said that he was invited over there by Jill, which was actually ended up being true, and we think he just made it up. And we're led to believe this whole time that he's the killer or one of the killers. And then it turns out Jill actually kidnapped Trevor and then ends up killing him by shooting him in the dick first, which is, oh man, that is rough to watch. I mean, obviously he was an asshole, but oof, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. And then shoots him in the head, puts him out of his misery. But I do like that. That was kind of similar to the thing they did with Sydney's dad in the first movie, the red herring. They actually had them captured, and then, well, Sydney's dad didn't end up dying, but Trevor did. Trevor, though, was a terrible character. So, like I said, not all the new characters were great, but the secondary cast of characters was definitely better than they were in 3. So, vast improvement in that department. The writing was also much better. Kevin Williamson returned, and you can see definitely some of the more slick and clever writing of the first 2 Scream movies that was lacking in the third one. So, it was nice to see that back, and you can certainly tell that the vibe felt more like the first 2. The third one just felt off throughout its entirety. It felt like it was trying too hard, and it ended up being too far into the almost parody category. And this one definitely felt like more of a return to form. It felt much more similar to the original in that way. So what I was going to talk about is the third act, which, again, most of it, the house stuff was great. And then we get to the hospital, which I certainly have some issues with this. Sydney survives, which I understand. Jill only stabbed her in the stomach, which, why not make sure she's dead? You know, shoot her in the head or stab her in the heart or something. Stabbing people in the stomach is not always... It certainly could kill them, but it definitely wouldn't always. Sydney survives, and then Jill accidentally lets it spill that she's the killer, or at least suspicious. She said something about her and Gail's matching wounds, which, oh, how'd she know about that? And then Dewey finds out what's going on. So what annoys me here a little bit is that Jill, throughout the entire movie, has been extremely careful and meticulous and has planned everything out perfectly, and it was going to work. And then she finds out Sydney's alive, and she goes into Sydney's room to kill her. It's like, now you're just giving yourself away, and you're throwing your whole plan about being the victim and becoming famous out the window. That I certainly did not like, and it didn't make much sense to me. Going along with that, our main 3, Sydney, Dewey, and Gail, you're really starting to notice their plot armor in this movie. It feels like they're just unkillable now. And even Jill points it out. She's like, who are you, Michael fucking Myers, to Sydney? Those 3 characters seem like they can't get killed by anything. And why? I mean, there was a part where Gail was struggling and having a little struggle with Ghostface, and he just stabs her in the shoulder when he could have easily stabbed her in the heart. Like, what are you doing? You can very easily see the plot armor of these 3 characters in this movie, and it's starting to get on my nerves. I don't know what they're going to do with the new one. I have a feeling that with different people involved, they're going to be a little gutsier, and they're probably going to kill off one of those big 3. And I don't want to say that I hope they do, because I do love those characters, even though Gail and Dewey's dynamic did start to annoy me in 3, and it got a little bit better here. I hope they have the balls to kill off one of those 3 characters. I think it's necessary at this point. They should have killed off Dewey in 2 when they did the fake death. How the fuck did he survive that? No idea. They should have killed one of them off in this one. And I hope... Again, it seems weird to hope for a character death, but it also seems necessary at this point to have the emotional weight that it should. So that's my thoughts on that. And that pretty much wraps up my thoughts on the entire movie. Scream 4, guys, is a vast improvement over 3. I think it's even a little bit better than 2. Nothing's going to touch the first one. I can't imagine any Scream movie ever being nearly as good as the first one, and hardly any horror movies, period. But this one was definitely a welcome return to form. Kevin Williamson came back. You could feel that. Certainly, the gore was amped up. The pacing was better. There were some cool kills in there. One of the best killer reveals, even though the other killer was one of the weakest. Had some issues with some of the plot armor with the characters and some of the things they did in the third act, and obviously not all the new characters were great. But overall, I have to say this is one that I very much enjoy, and it is my second favorite Scream movie. So Scream 4, I'm going to give a 7 out of 10. So there you have, guys. I'm seeing the new one on Friday, so that's going to be a lot of fun. I cannot wait. I'm hearing very, very good things about it, and I'm hoping maybe it can take that 2 spot above Scream 4, but at very least, I hope it surpasses Scream 2. If it's worse than Scream 3, that's going to be a huge issue. I don't think that's going to happen. I've only heard like one person so far that hasn't liked it, so I can't wait. And then Melissa Barrera being in it, which you guys know how much I love her. Can't wait for that. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And then after that, review, do my ranking, and then got some other cool stuff coming. So guys, if you enjoy this video, hit the like button. If you enjoy my channel in general, hit the subscribe button. And if you want to get notified when I post a video, hit the notification bell. Leave a comment if you've seen Scream 4 and what do you think? Do you think it's the second best Scream movie like me? A lot of people don't like it. So if you don't like it, certainly explain yourself there. And I will see you soon.